Welcome into another edition of D1 Extra. I'm Brian Fisher, and pleased to be joined now by Matt Baker, college football reporter of the Tampa Bay Times. And some big news, Matt, in the Sunshine State as Florida State confirmed on Wednesday that AD David Coburn would retire at the end of the academic year. And I'm guessing this wasn't a surprising move at all, given all the words coming out of Tallahassee that this news surfaced on Wednesday.
Yeah, first of all, thanks for having me on. Yeah, this has been not a surprise at all. I remember asking David Coburn a question after he fired Willie Taggart in 2019, asking something about with the premise that you're not going to be here for forever, right? Like he took the job more or less as a favor to John Thrasher, who was the president at the time of Florida State. FSU needed a short-term fix as they kind of figured out who was going to replace Stan Wilcox. That turned into like 8 months as an interim, and then that turned into a couple years as the head job. And David Coburn's job really was to figure out the finances. FSU's athletic department had some significant financial issues. And this is even before the pandemic. And obviously 2020 and everything that happened made that even more complicated. So everybody knew at some point, sooner rather than later, this was going to happen. Coburn was not going to be in the job for 10 or 20 years. It was going to, at some point, it was going to move this way. And then, they decided with the new president coming in and everything else, this was the time to start moving in that direction to somebody more long-term.
Well, there is a new president, Richard McCullough, and he came down from Harvard. What might he be looking for in a new athletic director, and who is what is on the to-do list, I guess, for the new guy or gal who takes over?
Yeah, I think FSU really needs someone who understands athletics better than David Coburn did. That's not meant as an insult to him at all, but you have to remember his background. He spent, I think it was 34 years involved in the state legislative process in Tallahassee. That is what his background was. He was a legislative guy and a numbers guy, a budget guy. Athletics and big time college sports, that was not his background or his forte. So I think FSU's new athletic director is really going to have to be someone who understands athletics and what it means to win at a high level. I think they're going to have to kind of figure out, what does FSU want to be now? For the longest time, FSU's goal was to be kind of like a Stanford or a UCLA, where they're not just winning at football. They're trying to win in softball and women's soccer and basketball and baseball and all that stuff, rather than just being a football factory. Is that still the case? I expect it to be, but that's something that Florida State's going to have to figure out as they move forward. And then the other big thing is they're going to have to figure out where the Seminoles stand whenever conference realignment happens again. The ACC's grant of rights, I think it's through 2036. So that seems pretty ironclad. But at the same time, I think everybody in the ACC and really in the country understands this is not a sustainable situation. For Florida State, for Clemson, Miami, Virginia Tech, for them to compete for national championships, the way the money gap is growing between the Big Ten and SEC, and then the ACC far behind with really not a lot of hope of catching up unless things change, something's going to have to give. So that's something that the new athletic director is really going to have to figure out as well. How can the Noles navigate this in some shape or form to go back to competing for national championships in football, like they have a reasonable expectation of doing?
Michael Offord, a former Central Michigan AD, took over the Seminole Boosters organization not too long ago after David Coburn took over, and he's obviously been a name that comes up right away in terms of this search. How much is he maybe the leading candidate, and who else could kind of get into the mix here in Tallahassee?
Yeah, I think that's the obvious name that came to mind before this happened. But when the news broke the other day, that was the obvious name that came to mind. Obviously, he has he has experience as an athletic director. He's had time now to get acquainted with Florida State and the specific ins and outs of this. I'm not going to say he's the favorite, but I'd be pretty surprised if it's not him. I don't know if there are other ADs involved. Michael Kelly at USF, his name came up in, I believe it was the Miami search at some point. He would be somebody that FSU would be wise to look at. I don't know that he's necessarily looking to leave South Florida, but he's got ties to the ACC and ties to the state. That would be another name that I would look at if I were Florida State. But yeah, Mike Alford would seem to be the obvious candidate.
And there have been some changes recently to the department in terms of the reorganization and creating a direct support organization. There's obviously basically the Seminole Boosters had been a long time separated from the athletic department. How much of those changes kind of help market the attractiveness to this job versus where it was 5 or 6 years ago when David Coburn took over?
An awful lot. You have to go back to the way things were, where the boosters more or less had more power than the athletic director. They were the ones who were raising all the money, and they didn't have a lot of guardrails in terms of how they spent it. So the Seminole Boosters raised the money, and they were the ones who figured out how to spend it. And there were times where that became butting heads. I think the lack of alignment, misalignment, alignment is a big buzzword here lately, it seems like, in the state of Florida. But the lack of alignment between the boosters and the athletic department is one reason why I think the Jimbo Fisher relationship soured to the way it did, where Jimbo wanted certain things and the Seminole boosters prioritized other things, prioritized other sports. And that led to the hurt feelings and the tension that led with Jimbo Fisher taking that 10-year, $75 million contract at Texas A&M. So I say all that to say that the old way that things went and what worked in Tallahassee for a long time, that was not sustainable in this modern era, I don't think. And Florida State, to their credit, recognized that a few years ago, made the direct support organization, the FSU, I think it's the FSU Athletic Association, same type of thing UCF has in the state, same type of thing that the Gators have in the state, very similar thing to what USF has in the state. And that's kind of the model for them. And it's something that FSU needed and certainly makes the job a lot more attractive and a lot more, I think, really conducive to success with FSU.
You mentioned Jimbo earlier there, and one of his big gripes, obviously, was just the state of facilities. That Florida State certainly had fallen behind a little bit. Where is the school now in terms of having kind of that master plan to reform, build certain football only facilities, and kind of move forward with a new era on the ground in terms of the actual buildings that are there?
They are working on it, but it is a process that has been, I mean, it's taken some time. If I'm not mistaken, Willie Taggart's before his first game, the Virginia Tech opener in 2018, they announced some plans to go forward with a football only facility. And here we are 3+ years later, whatever it is, and there's still nothing like concrete in terms of what it's going to look like and that sort of thing. At FSU, one of the issues they've had is when they kind of started getting caught up in the facilities craze, they built the indoor practice facility. I think it was before the 2013 national title season. They didn't necessarily have a master plan in what they wanted to do. So now they've been trying to figure out, okay, we need this standalone football complex like everybody has, like the Gators are going to open here next year. Where's it going to go? And that's, there's not like a lot of land. So they've threw out a couple different ideas. Maybe the more athletic center where things are now, maybe that becomes a football only facility, or maybe that's every sport but football, and football does its own thing. So here lately, they have made progress in terms of where it will be, what it's going to look like, that sort of thing. But it's still, I mean, it's not like shovels are going to go in the ground tomorrow or anything like that. That's still a ways away.
And you look at the state of Florida right now in terms of the Sunshine State. It's been really a state in transition. You have an AD search going on at Miami now. You have a change at FIU with hiring a new AD. Miami obviously in the search for one. Is there any overlap certainly with that hurricane search? And then what is kind of the state of affairs among the big three in the state right now?
You said, I think it's state of transition, which I think is being polite. The state's been kind of a mess. Let's face it, at least from where I sit in terms of everything that's happened, where the Gators, they struggle with football, which is why Dan Mullen's no longer there and why they just hired Billy Napier. FIU administratively was not in good shape. UCF changing conferences. USF, they hope at some point to maybe move up to the Big 12 and get a new change there. There's been a whole lot going on. And obviously what's happening at Miami, where I think Miami needs to have some serious conversations and figure out what are they going to do going forward? What are the Hurricanes going to look like? I see them currently running into the same situation where they're going to look like USC, where they are trying to figure out whether they want to have some of the old guard, the Miami days from the U way back when they were great, kind of running the show, or whether they want a businessman like the AD needs to be now. So that's the real concern that I would have for the Hurricanes is, are they going to go back and have a football player do it, even though he might not have the experience, or are they going to have a businessman do it? And I think the answers to that, whatever they're going to decide, is going to decide the shape and the long-term situation of the U. And I have major fears for them that they're going to go the wrong way and that they're going to remain an absolute mess.
I do want to jump back real quick to Florida State, just in particular, in this search. What is that going to mean for Mike Norvell? Because obviously he's a new head coach. He has not gotten the Seminoles to a bowl game just yet. So shown signs of progress, but being the third coach, having a new athletic director at this time in his tenure, always tends to spell some sort of hot seat going into next season. What is this spell going to mean for him having a new boss?
Yeah, I don't know about hot seat quite yet. Depends on how the move shakes out. If it is Mike Alford who gets promoted, I guess is promoted, who moves up into that role, he's going to have some familiarity with Norvell and the way he's done things. Looking at what he's done, Norvell inherited a bad situation, right? Well, let's face it. The Willie Taggart era was an absolute, it was a dysfunctional mess. I think we saw that on the field, and I think we saw that just the way things work behind the scenes. And Norvell spent some time cleaning it up. He inherited a rough situation in terms of the pandemic hits, so he doesn't get that full spring and the recruiting and all that stuff. You can see, if you watch the FSU closely this year, you could see progress, incremental progress game by game. They went from not knowing what they were doing against Jacksonville State. The defense got better. They decided, they zeroed in on Jordan Travis at quarterback, and when he was healthy, FSU's offense was pretty good. So you could see the baby steps there. And in addition to the culture and the big picture, they've got a top 12 recruiting class right now to, if that's able to stay, then you can see some major signs of growth and building blocks for the future. But yes, your general point is absolutely right. When there's a new president and a new AD, and you've got a coach who has not won yet, that generally spells some trouble. So we'll just kind of have to see. It's a bad answer, but we'll have to see who they bring in and how that person determines the progress that Norvell has made. And again, let's not forget the money aspect of it. FSU is paying a lot of money to Willie Taggart to not coach. I don't think they want to, or necessarily even can, pay Mike Norvell a lot of money to not coach if they're going to bring in some other big name who's going to command, $5 million a year, whatever it is.
All right, that's Matt Baker of the Tampa Bay Times. I appreciate your time coming on and discussing FSU.
Sure, thanks for having me.